If we go back and look at the sense of self, the sense of identity, we can go back as far as William James, typically considered to be the first American psychology professor. James, of course, was a philosopher and other things, but taught psychology at Harvard. And James did a lot of work on the notion of the self. And one of the things that he wrote at one point was that there were these two pieces of the self, the I and the me. And sometimes that's a little helpful, I think, and we won't go into it very deeply. But James said that there's the I, that he called the subjective part of us, and it involves autonomy, that sense that I have control. It involves uniqueness, the notion that my experience is mine and no one else's is exactly the same. It is stable. The I that I experience is kind of my sense of self that continues over time, that doesn't seem to change all the time. And it includes my self-consciousness, the ability to think about myself, to think, why did I do that? Why am I feeling this way? Why do I act this way? Kind of that self-consciousness. And then he said there's the me part that he said is very objective, the self-concept, understanding my physical qualities, my status, my skills, my characteristics, my beliefs, thinking, okay, I'm good at this, I'm not so good at this, I don't understand these kinds of things, I seem to be a friendly person, or I'm fairly shy, or whatever those things are. I'm good at math, I'm horrible at math. The me, for James, put together with the things that he called the I, kind of form a decent sense of identity. I think if we raised children who could do those things right there and do them fairly well, then we wouldn't worry so much about the concept of self-esteem, because our kids would have this sense of self, this sense of identity that would go way beyond the notion of self-esteem. When Erikson talked about the self and developing identity, Erikson said that as that happens when we're children, as we go through Erikson's stages, which you should know. Erikson says, when I'm an infant, I am what I can get. My sense of identity is about what I get. As I go into that second stage of autonomy, I become what I can manipulate. I am what I can hold on to and let go of. My identity becomes about grabbing stuff, holding on to stuff. As I move into those preschool and early school years, I am what I can think or imagine, or I am what I can make. And by the time I reach adolescence, I begin to have this sense of I am what I am, like Popeye used to have. You probably don't remember that. Y'all are all probably too young to have watched Popeye. But Erikson said that as we go through those Ericksonian stages of infancy and toddlers, and that our sense of who we are is built around the tasks that we're doing in those developmental stages, and that as we do that, we begin to get, set my clock here for a minute. As we do that, we begin to get more and more of a complete sense of identity. And so that by the time we're teenagers, we're kind of ready to pull that together. Now, we don't pull that together perfectly, but we're ready to begin to do it if we've done these things as children. And then I have a quote there from Erikson that identity expresses mutual relation, and that it connotes both a persistent sameness within oneself and a persistent sharing of some kind of characteristic with others. So, persistent sharing of some kind of essential character of others. That is, that we are both one with ourselves intrapersonally, and we are also connected with others interpersonally. We're doing both things, and that sense of identity is not just about me, it's about me and how I connect and relate with other people, because Erikson's theory, of course, was this social theory. And so it's not just about me, it's about me and others. Erikson talked a lot about ego identity. Ego identity for Erikson is kind of like what we would tend to think about probably when we say identity. He said it involves a conscious sense of individual identity, continuity of character, ego synthesis, bringing together the sense of who I am, putting together those early stages into a sense of this is who I am now as a teenager or young adult. Maintenance of kind of an inner solidarity with others. Kind of like that last quote on the bottom of the last slide. Individual identity, personal character, synthesizing of my sense of self, and a solidarity with others. Okay? He contrasted this with the ego ideal. The ego ideal was that Freudian notion of the superego that is perfect and never makes mistakes and follows all the rules and does everything correctly. And Erickson's looking at the notion of no, the ego ideal is not practical. Ego identity, though, is practical. We can develop that, and that would be a good and healthy thing. The ego identity can be attained by people, but it's always changing. Okay? The ego ideal that Freud proposed, we never get to. A healthy identity, we might say, is a combination of ego identity and ego ideal. Happens through the stages, but it's continually revised. You could think of that even kind of in Christian or spiritual terms, that there's that sense of the ideal as being this thing that we strive for, but we know we'll never really attain. Being like Jesus, maybe. We could say, well, that's what we should constantly work toward, but we know that we'll never be exactly that on earth. On the other hand, as a Christian person, I can have this kind of healthy understanding of who I really am and where I really am in my striving and what I can achieve and what I can't. So I might have this ideal out there, but what's really important for me is what I do with the real me, which is kind of related to that notion of ego identity. Now, self-concept for children seems to come from a combination of different places. Now, this list comes from a lot of different people, a lot of different sources. It's kind of a compilation, I think. But as kids begin to get out of infancy and begin to grow a little bit, they begin to develop a sense of who they are, self-concept. It seems to come from several places. It comes from scholastic competence. If you just think about this and apply this to yourself, I think you'll probably see some of this. If I am good in school or bad in school or somewhere in the middle, that begins to help me define who I am. As soon as I get in the school setting, I begin to do that. Athletic competence comes very early. If I can run or throw or kick a ball or climb on the monkey bars or whatever, that begins to tell me something about who I am. There are those of us who are great at that, and there are those of us who are horrible at that. And we begin to see that pretty early, even before school happens. But certainly once we get into a school setting and we begin to do social comparison, social acceptance tells me who I am. Do people like me or not? Do I hang around with the cool group? Am I always by myself? That begins to tell me who I am. My physical appearance very early begins to tell me who I am. Again, social comparison. Am I too skinny? Am I too short? Am I too fat? On and on and on and on. We begin to do that very, very early. Also tells me a little bit about who I am. How do I act? Am I the kid that always gets in trouble, or am I a good kid? Or am I somewhere in the middle? Am I just kind of not even there for most people? And then my sense of global success, particularly when I go to school. That sense that I have when I come home from school that I can do this. I got this. I'm good at this. This works for me. Or I hate this. I'm stupid. I'm ugly. I hate school. I don't ever want to go back to school. These things, particularly once we get into a social situation where we begin to compare ourselves with other kids, these things begin to tell us who we are and kind of develop our self-concept. Sadly, for a lot of us in a lot of places, the most significant thing is how we look. And that's just horribly sad and unfair, but it really is true. We know that you send kids to preschool, they start judging each other about how they look, what they're wearing, how their hair looks, the shape of their body when they're preschoolers. And so as parents, maybe that's one of those things we got to figure out how to work really hard on and get our kids to not do. Self-concept problems for preschoolers are pretty rare, because even if you go to school when you're 3 or 4 and people make fun of you, you kind of can get over it. But the older you get, the less you get over it. The older you get, the more it begins to make a difference to you. So by the time you're 6, if you go to school and you don't fit in and people make fun of you, it begins to really hurt. And you don't get over it so quickly. And by the time you're in middle school, it's devastating, particularly for girls. So, but it's devastating for boys too. So, tough situation trying to develop self-concept over time. If you're not good at things, if you look at that list and you think, I fail at all of that, it becomes very difficult. That's why self-esteem may not be the thing that's so important to us, but knowing who we are and being able to have a realistic view. So if people at school tell me I'm stupid, well, maybe I need to realize that I'm not stupid. That's not self-esteem. That's identity. That's self-concept. Self-concept seems to be built around the notion of 2 things, according to Harder. Am I good at the things that I think are important? Do I have lacking in importance to others? If we break it down to something really simple, then that's probably it. Am I good at the things that I think are important? And do other people like me? If I can get a little bit of that, then maybe I can have a healthy self-concept. Maybe if I don't get number 2, I can figure out number 1. Now, one of the important things on number 1 is that am I good at the things that I think are important? So maybe I'm not a good athlete, but maybe my parents can help me see that I read really well, that I'm a good reader, and I love to read. So that's great. I can be the good reader. I can be the kid that reads better than anybody else. Or I can be a kid who likes to work with his hands. I can maybe learn to build stuff. I may not be good at math, but I may be able to build things. So parents can help kids find something that they think is important that they can be good at. Now, that's not a perfect science, right? Your kid may crave more than anything in the world to be the best soccer player that ever lived, and they may be horrible at soccer. So it's not perfect, but nothing about parenting is. You just have to take your best shot and do the best you can to do good things for your kids. Stipek told us in 1984, this is an old idea, but it's still true, that as self-understanding increases, so does self-doubt. You know, Schopenhauer, the eternal pessimist, said, the smarter you are, the more miserable you are. And that's the same kind of idea. The more we know about ourselves, the more we seem to doubt ourselves. Now, this is not a horrible thing, because with this comes the notion of taking responsibility and not blaming stuff on bad luck or blaming things on other people. But if it's not tempered with some success and some sense of being good and accepted by other people, then it can become devastating for us. So that everything that we do turns out to be our stupid fault because we're just stupid. Again, this is particularly true for girls. Seems to happen that way in middle school and in high school. The girls take blame for things. And that seems to kind of follow a pattern throughout life. Women are much more likely to take the blame for things than men are. Think about why that might be true.